announcing today a major show of military force in the region.
In the vast expanse of the open sea, where the world's most powerful military forces often cross paths, a tense and mysterious game of cat and mouse unfolded. It was a routine patrol for the United States Navy, with the massive USS Gerald R. Ford, one of the most advanced aircraft carriers in the world, cruising through strategically important waters. Little did they know, they were being shadowed by something far more elusive than anything they could have anticipated. A quiet, unseen predator, an Iranian submarine. But this wasn't just a random encounter. This was a calculated move, one that aimed to test the limits of American vigilance, naval superiority, and perhaps even its will to respond. The Iranian submarine, for reasons that remain uncertain, had positioned itself in close proximity to the Ford, creating a dangerous game of hide-and-seek beneath the waves. Why had the Iranians chosen to shadow one of the U.S. Navy's most formidable vessels? And what message were they trying to send? As the submarine silently cruised in the depths, its sonar sensors scanning the waters, it was fully aware of the possibility that it could be detected at any moment. Yet it pressed on, making its presence known not through force, but through stealth and strategic positioning. This wasn't an act of aggression, but a deliberate challenge, a test of the American Navy's ability to detect and track underwater threats. On the surface, the USS Gerald R. Ford was in no rush. The massive carrier, surrounded by a fleet of escort ships, continued its mission, seemingly unaffected by the hidden presence beneath the waves. But underneath, the tension was palpable. The Iranian submarine knew that detection was inevitable. It wasn't trying to hide forever. It wanted the U.S. Navy to know it was there. The question was, how would the Navy respond? As the submarine followed the Ford for hours, the U.S. Navy's response was measured, calculated. Surveillance aircraft were launched, and the sounds of military helicopters slicing through the air could be heard as they scanned the waters. It wasn't a combat mission, but a test of patience and discipline. This wasn't the first time the U.S. Navy had been shadowed, but the game of cat and mouse was becoming increasingly intricate. What followed next was not a direct confrontation, but rather a psychological standoff, a battle of wills. The Iranians knew their presence would be detected. It was all part of the plan. The Americans knew they were being watched, but chose to remain calm, continuing their mission as if nothing had changed. It was a silent standoff. No shots fired, no missiles launched. Instead, both sides observed, analyzed, and collected data. The USS Gerald R. Ford was conducting its operations, while the Iranians were quietly gathering their own intelligence on the American fleet's responses. But just when the tension seemed unbearable, the Iranian submarine began to withdraw, quietly fading back into the depths, its mission accomplished. Or so it seemed. What had been the goal of this game? What had both sides learned from this quiet encounter beneath the waves? In this video, we'll delve into this gripping naval drama, a story of tension, stealth, and intelligence gathering that plays out far from the prying eyes of the public. How did this underwater encounter between the U.S. Navy and the Iranian submarine unfold? And what does it tell us about the state of modern naval warfare? Stay tuned, because this story is only the beginning. In the early hours of a quiet morning, as the USS Gerald R. Ford sailed through the Arabian Sea, its massive silhouette cutting through the misty horizon, something was stirring beneath the waves. The American aircraft carrier, known for its cutting-edge technology and military might, was far from alone in the vast expanse of open water. Unbeknownst to the crew aboard the carrier, a silent predator was moving in the depths below, watching and waiting. This was no ordinary encounter. The Ford was being tracked by an Iranian submarine, a sophisticated vessel capable of remaining unseen for hours, silently maneuvering beneath the waves. The submarine, believed to be one of Iran's most advanced, had been following the aircraft carrier for several days without being detected. It was a dangerous game of cat and mouse, a test of patience, skill, and military might. The American Navy had dealt with such situations before, but the nature of this encounter was different. The Iranian submarine was not merely lurking in the depths to spy. It had a clear mission. The submarine had been strategically positioned to shadow the USS Gerald R. Ford, and in doing so, test the readiness of the United States Navy. Iran had been increasingly asserting its naval presence in the region, and this maneuver was a direct challenge to American supremacy in these crucial waters. The act was a demonstration of Iran's growing naval capabilities, one that could send a message to the world about its intentions. It wasn't just a submarine trailing an aircraft carrier. It was a strategic act of military theater meant to challenge the U.S. Navy's claim over the strategic waters of the Middle East. The question on the minds of American naval officers was clear. How would the United States respond? At first, the crew of the Ford had no idea that a submarine was shadowing them. But as hours passed, there was an increasing sense that something wasn't right. The weather had cleared, and visibility was perfect, but there was still a lingering feeling of being watched. The carrier, surrounded by its escort ships, continued its operations, unaware of the danger lurking beneath. As the hours ticked on, the American crew grew increasingly suspicious. The surveillance drones launched from the carrier began picking up unusual sonar readings, and military aircraft were dispatched to monitor the surrounding waters. The situation began to take on an almost eerie quality, as the carrier and its escorts maintained their course, seemingly unaffected by the unknown presence. Despite the heightened alert, the Iranian submarine's crew remained calm, fully aware of the growing tension but sticking to their mission. They weren't there to engage in combat. They were there to send a message and see how the U.S. Navy would react. It was a test, a subtle, calculated move to gauge the strength and response time of the American forces in a high-stakes scenario. In the following hours, the Ford's crew noticed strange disturbances on their sonar, and the unmistakable sound of a distant submarine's propellers reverberated in the hull of the ship. The American fleet knew they were being watched, but the question remained: what would the U.S. Navy do about it? On the surface, the situation appeared to be just another routine patrol, but the tension was rising beneath the calm exterior. The Iranian submarine continued to shadow the USS Gerald R. Ford, its crew carefully monitoring the American vessel's movements, all while remaining undetected. In response, the U.S. Navy moved into a heightened state of alert. The Ford's escorts began to make subtle changes in their course, moving to more secure formations. Surveillance helicopters were dispatched to sweep the surrounding area. It was clear that the United States was taking this situation seriously. As the Iranian submarine maintained its course, the game of cat and mouse continued. No direct confrontation, but a growing sense of unease. The Iranian vessel, knowing that it was under increasing scrutiny, didn't retreat. Instead, it pressed on, testing the waters, trying to provoke a response. But the American Navy, despite the mounting pressure, held its ground. It was a test of nerves, a psychological game where neither side could afford to make the first move. Eventually, after hours of tense proximity, the Iranian submarine began to withdraw, its mission accomplished. The crew of the USS Gerald R. Ford would never know exactly why they had been followed or what the Iranian submarine had hoped to achieve. But one thing was certain: this was more than just a random encounter. It was a carefully calculated maneuver that demonstrated Iran's increasing naval capabilities and its desire to challenge American dominance in the region. The event served as a reminder of the delicate balance of power in the world's most contested waters, where every move is scrutinized and every action has far-reaching consequences. As the Iranian submarine continued its shadowing of the USS Gerald R. Ford, the atmosphere aboard the American vessel grew tenser. The Ford, a state-of-the-art aircraft carrier, was fully aware of its high value as a military asset, and the sudden proximity of a potential adversary beneath the waves raised the stakes of this operation. The American crew, trained for such contingencies, maintained their calm, but the situation was no longer a routine patrol. The Ford had been followed for hours, and its crew was now actively working to counter the challenge presented by the Iranian submarine. To understand how the United States responded, it's important to consider the behavior of the Ford's crew, who remained composed despite the growing tension. The massive aircraft carrier, while equipped with advanced radar, sonar, and detection systems, was operating in waters known for their unpredictable challenges. The proximity of an unknown submarine required careful attention. The Ford's escort ships adjusted their formation, with destroyers and frigates surrounding the carrier in tight defensive patterns. They moved slowly and deliberately, ensuring that the Iranian submarine had no opportunity to sneak past their sensors. The surrounding vessels were equipped with some of the most advanced anti-submarine detection systems in the world, including sonar arrays capable of locating submarines even in the murky depths of the sea. Meanwhile, the Ford's flight deck became the focal point for surveillance operations. Helicopters like the MH-60R Seahawk were launched to further patrol the surrounding waters. These helicopters were equipped with advanced sonar buoys, capable of tracking even the faintest signals from submerged vessels. The crew aboard the Ford was already preparing for the worst-case scenario, that the submarine might attempt an aggressive move, or worse, trigger an escalation. It was during these tense moments that the first signs of a possible psychological standoff began to unfold. Despite the vast technological advantage that the USS Gerald R. Ford had in terms of sonar, radar, and air support, the Iranian submarine's crew seemed to be engaging in a psychological game. The submarine had intentionally stayed just within the range of the Ford's detection systems. This was not a coincidence. The idea was to test the response of the American Navy. Rather than retreat, the Iranian submarine maintained its position, as if daring the Americans to make a move. Its goal was clear. See how the U.S. Navy would react to its subtle challenge. At this point, it became a matter of mental fortitude. The Ford was clearly aware of its surroundings. The helicopter crews were tracking the submarine's movements with precision, and the ships within the escort fleet were positioning themselves for any unexpected change in the situation. Yet there was a tacit understanding that the situation could not escalate. Both sides were aware that the consequences of a military confrontation in these sensitive waters would be catastrophic. So, the psychological standoff continued, with both sides carefully monitoring each other. On the surface, the Ford appeared unaffected, continuing its operations as planned. The air wing aboard the carrier carried out regular exercises, while the ship maintained its course. The Iranians, on the other hand, were also calculating every move. The closer they remained to the carrier, the more data they were able to collect about the U.S. Navy's operations. Each course correction, each maneuver made by the Ford and its escort ships provided valuable intelligence on American tactics. It became evident that the Iranian submarine was collecting information not just about the Ford itself, but about the entire American naval presence in the region. This was a sophisticated, layered operation aimed at gaining as much insight into U.S. capabilities as possible. The psychological aspect of this encounter became even more apparent as the hours passed. Neither side had taken any aggressive action, but the tension was undeniable. For the crew aboard the Ford, maintaining calm was paramount. They knew that the moment they allowed their emotions to take over, they would risk making a misstep, whether it was deploying a weapon too early or escalating a confrontation. The Iranian submarine was undoubtedly aware of this. The more the Ford demonstrated restraint, the more it sent a message to Iran that the U.S. Navy was composed, capable, and ready to face any challenge without overreacting. Yet the restraint shown by the Ford was not simply a matter of discipline. It was a calculated move by the American Navy, too. They were letting the Iranians show their hand. The longer the Iranian submarine stayed within detection range, the more the Americans were able to observe its behavior, study its technology, and analyze its tactics. It became clear that the Iranian submarine wasn't just shadowing the Ford. It was also engaging in its own form of intelligence gathering. For the Americans, this wasn't a clear-cut victory, but neither was it a defeat. By not responding aggressively to the Iranian vessel's shadowing, the Ford had effectively turned the situation into a battle of wits. Eventually, after hours of maintaining its position, the Iranian submarine seemed to reach its limits. The crew had gotten the data they needed, and their mission was accomplished. The submarine began to slowly withdraw, diving deeper into the sea and disappearing into the vast expanse of the Arabian waters. It was a move that signified both an end to the operation and a realization by the Iranian crew that their presence had been felt and understood. The USS Gerald R. Ford and its accompanying ships continued their operations as if nothing had happened. To the untrained eye, it may have seemed like just another day at sea. However, the crew knew the truth. They had been tested. The encounter had been a carefully calculated challenge by the Iranian Navy, aimed at gauging U.S. response times, testing the effectiveness of American surveillance systems, and sending a message to the world about Iran's growing naval capabilities. For the Ford's crew, the operation had served as a reminder of the delicate balance of power in international waters. The operation had not escalated into a confrontation, but it had still been an intense psychological encounter, one that showed just how high the stakes were in these contested waters. Both sides had walked away with valuable insights. Iran had learned more about the U.S. Navy's response protocols, and the U.S. Navy had a clearer understanding of the Iranian Navy's willingness to engage in such high-stakes games. The encounter, though non-violent, underscored the importance of maintaining control, exercising restraint, and understanding the psychological aspects of modern naval warfare. Both sides knew that they would need to be ready for whatever might come next. The next confrontation could be more direct, or it could be another test of wits. Either way, the lessons learned from this encounter would not soon be forgotten. As the Iranian submarine silently withdrew into the depths of the Arabian Sea, a sense of calm slowly returned to the crew aboard the USS Gerald R. Ford. The tense hours of shadowing, the mental strain of knowing they were being tested, had finally come to an end. The Ford continued its operations, seemingly unaffected by the encounter, but the truth was far more complex. Beneath the surface, the consequences of the operation would reverberate across both military forces for some time to come. While the situation had not escalated into open confrontation, both sides walked away with valuable insights, each gaining a deeper understanding of the other's strengths, weaknesses, and willingness to engage in high-stakes naval tactics. For the Iranian Navy, the mission had been a calculated success. The submarine's ability to shadow the Ford for hours without being detected too early had proven the effectiveness of Iran's growing naval capabilities. The Iranian crew had tested American vigilance and discipline, pushing the limits of what they could do without triggering an aggressive response. The mission had served as an important intelligence-gathering operation, providing Iran with valuable data about American anti-submarine operations and response times. The Iranian Navy now had a clearer picture of how quickly the Ford would detect a submerged threat and what the American forces would do in such a scenario. This new information would help them plan their future operations, as well as potentially adjust their strategies for dealing with the U.S. Navy in the region. More importantly, the encounter sent a powerful message to the United States. Iran was no longer a passive player in the region. It was a force to be reckoned with, capable of carrying out sophisticated operations that could challenge even the most advanced American vessels. For the U.S. Navy, the operation was a reminder of how delicate the balance of power in international waters truly was. The USS Gerald R. Ford, with all its technological superiority, had faced a real challenge. Despite their best efforts, the American forces had been unable to neutralize the potential threat of the Iranian submarine quickly. The test was a wake-up call, reminding them that in this new age of naval warfare, threats could come from unexpected places, and the stakes were higher than ever. The U.S. Navy's decision to remain calm and measured throughout the ordeal had been the right one, but the encounter still left lingering questions. Could the Ford have responded more swiftly? Was there a vulnerability in its ability to detect submarines in certain conditions? These were questions that would be analyzed and reviewed in the coming days as the Navy sought to refine its operations and ensure that it was ready for whatever might come next. The absence of direct conflict in this case was a victory of sorts, but it was also a reminder of how close the world had come to a dangerous escalation. Both sides had played their part in preventing open confrontation, exercising restraint and diplomacy in a delicate game of nerves. The situation could easily have spiraled out of control if either side had miscalculated. Yet in the end, it was not the weapons that were the deciding factor, but the ability of both forces to maintain control over their emotions and impulses. In the broader context of global military strategy, the incident served as a powerful lesson in the importance of psychological warfare, restraint, and intelligence gathering. The United States had been tested, and while they had passed the test in terms of holding their position and maintaining a calm response, they knew that future encounters with Iran, or any other nation, could prove more challenging. For the Iranian Navy, this was just the beginning of a new chapter in their naval operations. The mission had proven to be an invaluable learning experience, one that would help them adapt their strategies for the future. In the years to come, Iran would likely continue to challenge American supremacy in the region, using the lessons learned from this operation to further refine their tactics and push the boundaries of what they could achieve. Both sides had come away from this encounter with valuable information, and while the immediate threat had dissipated, the underlying tension in the region remained. This operation, while seemingly minor in the grand scope of global military events, was a microcosm of the larger power struggle that continues to unfold on the world stage. As both countries continued to hone their naval capabilities, one thing was clear. The balance of power in the Arabian Sea was more fragile than ever. Both nations had been tested, and both would be watching each other's moves closely in the future. What had been a quiet encounter beneath the waves was only the beginning of a much larger, ongoing game of military strategy and psychological warfare.